My relatives used to constantly barrage my dad asking for money to the point where once when I was 12, he had to get a third job, which was night shift to meet their demands and mine. This always made me feel bad for my dad as he was working so hard to make ends meet for just me and him. And on top of that, my relatives asking him for money was like another weight thrown on him. I never asked him why he didn't just decline their requests and tell them that he couldn't pay them their monthly allowance, but I assume it was because he felt it as an obligation of his. My mom's side of the family actually used to ask for more money than my dad's side. My dad felt that after my mom's passing, the responsibility to look after her parents was now his duty, which is why I assume he was so determined to meet their requests. I loved my dad, and I understood why he wanted to help out our extended family so much. But seeing the stress they caused him made me grow a kind of resentment towards them. It was especially strong when I was a child. After years of hard work, my dad had finally gotten a good enough job that paid him well and required less work. He was able to take a break and start actually saving money instead of living from paycheck to paycheck. So when I recently got the news that my dad had passed away on the way back from work in a truck-related accident, I felt depressed. My dad was the only proper family I had, and his passing meant that I was left alone for the first time in my life. I live alone by myself in a university dorm, so I didn't really have anyone except a few close friends of mine to share the news with. They tried comforting me as much as they could, but it didn't really fix anything. I fell into a 2-month-long depression. Knowing that I had no one to go home to during summer breaks took a large toll on me. I attended my father's funeral where some of his friends attended and a few family members, mainly just my aunts and uncles, not my cousins. They tried doing what they could to tell me it'll all be alright and that I can come to them anytime I want, but it didn't change the fact that it was those same people that had caused my father so much difficulty in his life. The recently I had for my family didn't really fade over time as I didn't give much effort to try to make things up with them. I didn't actually tell them that the reason I was so distant and resentful was because of what they did to my father, so they just assumed it was because I was grieving. When it came time for the lawyer to read out my father's will, they informed me that he had left all his assets, properties, and money to me and only me. He gave his brother and sister some old memorabilia to remember him by, things like items and family heirlooms. I was surprised that he didn't give my relatives anything else like money or assets, but it made sense as I was his only child, and my relatives didn't mean as much to him as I did. Be lying if I didn't say that my relatives, especially my aunt and uncle, were a bit disappointed that my father didn't leave them any money or assets, but they understood the reasoning and didn't make a big deal out of it. From my inheritance, I also received access to his bank accounts as well as the passwords to anything else he had that contained money to be withdrawn. When I started looking through the bank accounts, I noticed that his bank accounts were still set up to transfer my relatives' money monthly. It was about $200 monthly being transferred to my cousins and $300 being transferred to my grandparents on my mom's side. In total, it was $600 a month being transferred to my cousins, grandparents, and a few other people here and there. At the time, I assumed that as my father had passed and his money was now my property, that I have the right to stop the transactions and support my relatives from his accounts as it wasn't my responsibility to send them support. The real problems began here after stopping the transactions. So a month passed with no issues or complaints from my relatives. I continued with my university, and everything was going well. However, it was after the month ended and the next month began that issues started. My relatives noticed that they didn't get any transfer of money in their bank accounts on the 2nd of the month, and they immediately called me to ask me about it. I don't remember specifically what I said in the call, but they asked me about why they didn't receive any money. And I was a bit confused and then realized that they were talking about the monthly bank transfers. I told them that I canceled them as it was now my money, and I didn't have any obligation to send them anything. I remember them getting really upset and mad about this, saying stuff like your father was sending us this money as a promise, and now you can't just stop sending it, and stuff like we need this money, and it's unfair how you're canceling it. Overall, the gist is that they were really upset about this, but at that moment in time, I really don't care enough about my relatives to work anything out with them. So I told them frankly that it was now my money, my assets, and my choice whether I wanted to send them money, and I choose not to, and I ended the call. They were spamming my phone calling me a cheat and some really bad words, but I just blocked their accounts on WhatsApp and went on with my week. The rest of that week went pretty well. I didn't see myself as a bad guy as it was my choice to send them support, and I chose not to. I also very clearly remembered how they had put my dad into so much stress when he was working paycheck to paycheck, so I definitely wasn't fond of them in any way. The real surprise came when one of my cousins actually visited me in my dorm to talk to me. It was very unexpected and abrupt, but I still had him over. He wasn't immediately clear on why he was over at first, but I had my suspicions it was because of the money issue. Those suspicions were right in the end because once he had buttered me up and everything, he asked me about the money. I told him clearly that it was my money and that it is not my duty to continue my father's funding. He was arguing that because it was still my father's money that I inherited, that I was still required to let the month's $600 through. I got overly mad at him because of this and told him that he didn't even show up to my father's funeral yet. He was standing there demanding his money. If that resentment for my relatives had been getting any weaker, I can guarantee that it relit in that moment at full flame. I kicked my cousin out of my dorm and told him that if he came here again, I'd get a restraining order against him over harassment. He also told me that he'd be taking this to court with his sister and other relatives, and I shrugged it off. I just assumed then that any logical, sensible court in this country would obviously take my side in this type of dispute as I clearly had the better argument, but I guess I underestimated how messed up our judicial system is. After a week or two passed, I got a letter in my mail, and it read that I was being sued by my cousin and that I had to show up to court on the 16th March, on which the jury will listen to the arguments from both sides. On top of that, I was thrown the hurdle of having to get a lawyer out of my own pocket, which cost a lot of money, especially for a college student. The audacity that my relatives had to take me to court over denying them something that was completely my right was absurd. There were 15 days till the court date, and I had to find a lawyer that would fit into my budget and defend my case well. I tried getting in contact with my cousin as I was infuriated, but I was blocked. And when I went to their house in person, they wouldn't open the door and only talk to me through their camera, where they just told me to wait until the court date. I cannot explain how stressed out this whole situation made me, and they were just doing to me what they had been doing to my dad my whole life. Regardless, I went to a law firm and got a lawyer that fit within my budget. I told her about the situation and presented all my arguments that I had. She told me not to worry, as I was a clear winner in this dispute, and I could in fact sue my cousins back for harassment and stress and would easily win the case, so that cooled me down a bit. In the meantime, while I was waiting for the court date, I decided to go through my dad's personal records to see if I could find anything that could help me in this case to prove that not only had my relatives caused me stress, but it kept my dad stressed his whole life. When 16th came, I made my way to court.